My name is Riley Lawson, and I'm 34 years old. On the morning of my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, I drove up to the $510,000 lakeside cottage I had secretly bought them, and found my mother standing in the driveway, shaking, while a stranger's SUV sat in the spot where her surprise was supposed to be. My brother-in-law had already turned my gift into a rental. There was a lockbox on the door I paid for. There was a little wooden sign with his name on it by the mailbox. And what he said, looking my mother straight in the eye, and what came out of my briefcase 20 minutes later, turned my family's happiest day into the day everything split open. But here's the part nobody at that lake could have guessed. The fence was already built. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet strength wins the day. We tell stories about ordinary people who learn to draw the line with the people they love most. If that speaks to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because this one gets personal. Some kids learn to ride a bike first. I learned to read a level. My dad, Walt Lawson, taught shop class at the same high school in Wyoming, Michigan for 31 years, and before he'd let me pedal anything, he made me check the driveway slope with his old brass level, because you don't trust a surface until you've measured it. That sentence basically became my career. I manage contracts for a medical device company in Grand Rapids. I'm the person who reads page 41 of an agreement everyone else signed at page 1, the person who finds the cancellation clause that eats you alive in year 3. I read terms and conditions for a living, and if I'm honest, a little bit for pleasure. In my family, that made me useful the way a fire extinguisher is useful. Need a lease reviewed, a warranty fought, an insurance appeal written at 11 at night? Call Riley. But at the dinner table, when actual decisions got made, where Thanksgiving happens, whose kids get the attention, whose opinion counts, I was the younger daughter, the quiet one, the one who'd give in because giving in was cheaper than the argument. My sister Vanessa is 3 years older and has never once in her life doubted that the front seat was hers. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you need to understand what I was. The family's paperwork department. Trusted with everything, consulted on nothing. And paperwork people learn a specific lesson early. If you can't win the conversation, you can build the structure. Remember that. It's the whole story, really. 3 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He was 65 then, 68 now, and if you know the disease, you know it doesn't arrive all at once. It moves in slowly, like water under a door. First, it was his right hand. He started keeping it in his pocket at church, at the hardware store, at my niece's birthday party. And my dad is not a hands-in-pockets man, so I noticed. Then it was the stairs. My parents' house is a 1989 two-story he bought working 2 jobs, and he knows every squeak in it, and it turned on him anyway. The bathtub with the high step, the basement stairs with the laundry at the bottom, the hallway rug that had been fine for 30 years and was suddenly a tripwire. My mother, Carol, started sleeping badly, not because he'd fallen, but because she was listening for it. She kept a phone in the bathroom and a nightlight in every outlet, and she'd developed this bright, exhausting cheerfulness that women of her generation deploy instead of saying the word afraid. Dad hated all of it. He's a proud man, precise, a measurer. The kind of man who'd rather grip a doorframe and pretend he's inspecting the trim than take your arm. Watching him negotiate with his own house broke something in me, quietly, over many months. A house is supposed to be on your side. Theirs had switched teams. And somewhere in that third winter, standing in their hallway watching him plan a route to the kitchen like it was a river crossing, I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like what I am. A contracts person. If the house was the problem, I would replace the house. Here's the thing about my parents you should know. On their refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a pie, there has been the same photograph for 40 years. June 1986. 2 broke newlyweds in folding chairs outside a $9 a night motel at Maple Lake, an hour north of Grand Rapids. My mother is laughing. My father has hair. They talk about that week like other people talk about Paris. Someday, a place on the water, Dad would say, and then someday got busy raising 2 girls on a teacher's salary, and the photo just stayed on the fridge, fading politely. In late 2024, I started looking. My requirements would have made any realtor cry. 1 story, no steps, on Maple Lake specifically, with a bedroom that could hold a hospital bed someday without ever having to say those words out loud. It took a year to find it, and it took everything I had to buy it. I want to be plain about the money, because the number matters later. $210,000 in savings, 11 years of maxed contributions and skipped vacations. $185,000 my grandmother left me, which I had never touched because it felt like her hands, and $115,000 from selling my downtown condo. I moved into a rented 1-bedroom and told everyone I wanted less to clean. $510,000, all in, purchase and renovation. Every dollar mine, every dollar accounted for, not $1 borrowed or asked for. I closed in February 2026 and drove out to the empty cottage alone and stood on the dock and cried like an idiot. Then I did something very me. I only told one person. It turned out to be exactly the wrong one. For the next stretch, and honestly for the year of hunting before it, that cottage became my second job. I wasn't building a lake house. I was building the one opponent my dad's disease couldn't beat. 0 entry shower, no lip, no step, a teak bench, and a handheld sprayer. Slip-resistant flooring through the whole place, rated for wet feet. Chosen after I made the contractor walk on 6 samples in socks. Lever handles on every door, because a doorknob is a test of grip strength and my father doesn't need more tests. Wider doorways. A single floor, obviously. Grab rails in white oak. Real ones, beautiful ones. Sanded soft, because the medical supply chrome kind would have made Dad feel like a patient in his own home, and the entire point was the opposite. The crew started calling me the level lady because I checked every rail with Dad's old brass level, and I did not consider it an insult. Out back, a gently sloped path down to the dock with a continuous cedar handrail, so a man who measures twice can walk to the water by himself, on his own schedule, with nobody hovering. That rail took 3 tries to get right. I paid for the 3rd try with a smile. And because caution is not just my personality but my actual profession, I did one more thing that spring. I put a doorbell camera on the front entry. Not because I suspected anyone, because a $500,000 empty house an hour from my apartment deserved an eye on it. I want that on the record. I wasn't naive, I was insured, alarmed, and cameraed. It just turns out a camera only tells you who walked in. It can't tell you what they were carrying out. In March 2026, a month after closing, I sat in the office of a trusts and estates attorney named Dana Okafor and built the fence. We moved the cottage's title into an irrevocable trust, the Lakeside 40 Trust, because I'm sentimental in paperwork if nowhere else. An independent professional trustee, Meridian Fiduciary, holds legal title. My parents are the lifetime beneficiaries, exclusive right to occupy the property for as long as either of them is alive, spelled out in an occupancy agreement with language I checked the way I check everything. No sale, no mortgage, no lease, no rental of any kind without the trustee's prior written consent, and the trustee answers to the trust document, not to charm. Dana asked me the standard questions about tax exposure and Medicaid look-back periods, and I gave the standard answers, and then she looked at me over her glasses and asked the unstandard one. Anyone in the family you're specifically worried about? I said no. I said it quickly. And then I paid extra to make the no rental clause tighter. I've thought about that moment a lot since. How I couldn't say my brother-in-law's name out loud in a lawyer's office, in a room built for exactly that sentence, but I could spend $300 an hour armoring against him in clause language. That's who I was. I didn't have confrontations. I had provisions. The deed recorded in March. The fence was finished 3 months before anyone tried to climb it, and I need you to hold on to that fact, because everything that happens later happens because the fence came first. Paper can't stop a story from being told, but it decides how the story ends. Now let me introduce you properly to my brother-in-law, Craig Boyd, 41, husband of Vanessa, founder and entire staff of Boyd Property Group LLC. Craig has had, in the decade I've known him, a supplement business, a drop shipping business, a wholesale real estate mentorship, and 2 ventures that ended with lawyers and were never spoken of again. Craig believes, sincerely, the way other men believe in God, that an idle asset is a dying asset. He'll tell you at dinner. He once appraised my parents' furniture with his eyes while eating my mother's pot roast. You could watch him do it, item by item, like a cursor moving. He's charming in the way of men who need you to believe they're winning, and my sister loves him with the fierce defensive love you give a thing you've bet your whole identity on. 19 days before the anniversary, I needed help. The surprise required staging, groceries, flowers, beds made. My parents lured north for brunch by the lake without suspecting. I couldn't do it all from Grand Rapids and keep my job. So I told the one person I believed I could half trust with half the truth, Vanessa. I sat in her kitchen in Rockford, swore her to secrecy, and watched my sister's eyes go wet when I said what I'd built for Mom and Dad, and for one warm minute we were 9 and 12 again. She hugged me. She promised. I gave her the spare key. My doorbell camera has a record of what that promise was worth. Vanessa's car in the cottage driveway that same weekend, which was the plan, and her husband in the passenger seat, which was not. 19 days later, a family I'd never met opened my parents' front door with a code. The last 3 weeks before the anniversary were a sprint on 2 fronts. At work, I was closing out a quarter's worth of supplier agreements. At home, I was project managing a surprise with a spreadsheet, because of course, I was. I ordered the cake. Lemon, their wedding flavor. I wrote the toast and rewrote it 6 times, and I had a key made. Not a copy. A presentation key. Solid brass, engraved along the bow. W&C. 40 years. It rode around in my briefcase for 2 weeks, in a little velvet box, next to the folder of trust documents I planned to walk them through gently, after the champagne, in language that didn't sound like a law office. Meanwhile, the doorbell camera pinged me faithfully. Vanessa's car, Tuesday. Vanessa's car, Saturday. Exactly what I'd asked for. She was staging the house, stocking the fridge, doing her part. Every notification made me feel lucky to have a sister. Once, my phone showed a car I didn't know in the drive, and I actually called her about it, and she laughed. "That's the florist, Riley. Breathe." I breathed. That's the part that still gets me. I wasn't careless. I checked. The camera did its job perfectly. It told me who came and went. It just couldn't tell me that my neighbor up there, Gus, 70, retired Lake Patrol, mows in black socks, had started waving down unfamiliar SUVs that pulled in on weekends, or that the answer he kept getting was, "We're guests. We booked online." Some information doesn't travel until it's standing in your driveway. Mine arrived on the morning of June 20th, holding a wheeled suitcase. The plan for the day was clean. Vanessa would pick up Mom and Dad at 9 for brunch at the lake, some story about a new cafe with a view. I'd leave Grand Rapids at 9:30 with the cake, the champagne, and the briefcase, and come up the lake road at 10:15, by which point they'd be parked at the overlook 2 minutes from the cottage. Then the walk to the door, the key, the reveal. I had rehearsed the moment so many times it had camera angles. My mother's hands going to her mouth. My father seeing the dock rail. I drove north with the windows down, cake belted into the passenger seat like a 5th family member, and I remember thinking the lake looked like hammered tin, and that by dinner my parents would be people who lived on it. Then I made the turn into the gravel drive, and my brain did that thing where it refuses the picture. 2 SUVs I didn't know, parked nose out. A folding luggage cart. A luggage cart by the porch. On the front door, over the knob I'd chosen because levers are kinder to shaking hands, sat a gray steel lockbox, the kind realtors and rental hosts use, bolted on like a growth. And by the mailbox, on a little cedar stake, a rootered wooden sign, freshly sealed, reading Boyd Lake House Retreat. For a full 3 seconds I thought I was at the wrong house. That's the honest truth. I checked the dock rail to be sure. Then I saw my mother. She was standing in the middle of the driveway in her anniversary dress, and she was shaking. Vanessa's car was there too, doors open. My mother stood in the gravel with both hands pressed flat against her stomach like she was holding something in, and she could not stop shaking. Not crying. Shaking. Which is worse, because crying is a release, and shaking is a siege. My father stood beside her unnaturally straight, feet planted wide, and I knew that stance. It's what he does when the tremor is bad, and he refuses to let it win in public. He wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at a fixed point across the lake, jaw set, a man staying upright by geometry. Coming out the front door, my front door, their front door, was a cheerful family of 5 in swimsuits and cover-ups, hauling coolers and that luggage cart. The dad of the group saw us clustered in the driveway and gave the friendly, oblivious wave of a satisfied customer. "Gorgeous place," he said to no one in particular. 5 stars. Craig's a super responsive host. He pronounced Craig's name the way you'd mention a buddy. One of his kids ran a last lap down my father's cedar-railed dock path, sandals slapping the slope I'd had rebuilt 3 times, and I heard my mother make a small sound. The guests loaded up and crunched away down the drive, and the 4 of us stood in the sudden quiet with the lockbox and the sign. My mother's voice came out about 1 inch tall. "Riley, there were strangers. In the house. Vanessa says..." She stopped, pressed her lips together, started over. "Whose house is this?" And before I could answer my mother's question, the screen door swung open, and my brother-in-law stepped out onto the porch with his arms spread wide, smiling like a man about to accept an award. "There they are!" Craig came down the steps in a polo the color of a golf course, and I understood with a lurch that he wasn't caught. He was hosting. He thought this was his morning. "Walt, Carol, happy anniversary. Come in. Come in." We cleaned up after checkout. Inside, my living room had been staged, brochure-looking throw pillows, a laminated welcome guests binder on the coffee table I'd bought, a basket of single-serve coffee pods where I'd planned to put my mother's teapot. Craig gestured us in like a realtor at an open house and started the presentation he had clearly rehearsed. He'd gotten the place listed 2.5 weeks ago. 6 bookings already locked for summer. 19.4 in gross revenue, Walt. $19,400. The place literally pays for itself. Peak weeks rented out, but you folks would have it most off-season weekdays. Obviously, family gets priority. And then he reached into his shirt pocket and produced a check, and this is the detail I will be describing to a therapist someday. He handed my shaking mother a check for $2,100, the first payout. With both hands, like a diploma. "First of many, Carol." My mother looked down at the check like he'd handed her a dead bird. "But whose house?" she began again, and her voice cracked in the middle. And Craig, smiling, warm, absolutely certain, looked my mother in the eye and delivered the sentence he'd probably practiced in the truck. "It belongs to the family now." Behind him, my sister stood by the fireplace I'd had rebuilt, and she was beaming, glowing, proud. I set my briefcase down on the coffee table on top of the guest binder, and the click of the latches was the loudest sound in the room. I didn't open it yet. First, I asked questions because that's what I do. In my job, you never show your claws before you've heard their story. I used my work voice, the flat, friendly one that makes sales reps nervous. "Craig, quick logistics. Who signed the rental agreements with those guests?" He blinked, recovered, smiled. "I did. Well, Boyd Property Group manages it." "Okay. And the payouts route where?" "Business account, then we distribute. Carol's holding the first distribution right now." He said, "Distribute like a man handing out loaves." "Last one. Who gave you the authority to lease this property?" And that's where the smile went patient. The special patience of a man who has decided your question is the real problem in the room. "Riley," Craig said gently, like I was slow. "A family asset sitting empty is a family problem. We solved it. You, of all people, should appreciate efficient use of capital." Vanessa stepped in from the fireplace, arms crossed, and hit me with the reversal she'd apparently been holding since I walked in. And honestly, Riley, you were going to hide a whole house from everyone? From your own family? We found out and we handled it like adults instead of making it weird and secret. There it was. I had been reclassified. From giver to hoarder. In one sentence. In a living room I paid for. While our mother stood shaking with a stranger's check in her hand. I've spent my whole life being talked over at family tables, and I felt the old reflex rise. Absorb it, smooth it, fix it quietly, later. Then I looked past them both, at my father. He hadn't spoken at all. He was standing at the mouth of the hallway, and he was running his thumb along the white oak grab rail, slowly, back and forth, like he was reading it. The last guest's tires faded down the gravel, and my mother asked, in the bright, brittle hostess voice she uses when the ship is going down, if we could all please sit and talk like a family. So we sat, on rental-staged furniture, and Craig kept selling, because selling is what Craig does when other men would apologize. Airbnb speak washed over the room, occupancy rates, shoulder season, dynamic pricing, self-managing asset. My father sat with both hands flat on his thighs, pressing them still, and said nothing at all. And his silence had a specific gravity to it that everyone kept talking louder to avoid. And then Craig, deep in his pitch, said the thing he shouldn't have known. Look, on a 430 purchase, even before the renovation money, you're looking at a 7-8% gross yield, which for this lake, 430. $430,000. The purchase price, before renovation, a number that existed in exactly one place at that lake. The closing folder in the locked file drawer of the cottage office, the drawer whose key lived on the ring I'd given my sister. Nobody knew that number. Not my parents, not the neighbors, not the florist. I looked at Vanessa, and Vanessa looked at the window, with sudden deep interest in the water view, and the last soft thing in me quietly got up and left the room. She hadn't just mentioned the cottage to her husband. She'd gone through my files and photographed my closing documents, or let him do it. And either way, my sister had cased the gift I'd sworn her to protect. Craig, I said, still level. Where'd you get 430? The pause before his answer lasted half a second too long, so I reached over and unlocked the briefcase. Here's what was supposed to happen with that briefcase. Champagne first, then the toast, then me kneeling by my mother's chair, opening it slowly, presenting the brass key in its velvet box, and walking my parents, gently, joyfully, through papers that said the lake was theirs for the rest of their lives. Instead, I opened it on top of Craig's laminated guest binder in a room that smelled like other people's sunscreen. I laid the documents out one at a time, facing them, in the order I'd have used for a hostile vendor. The recorded deed, title held by the Lakeside 40 Trust since March. The trust instrument, trustee, Meridian Fiduciary Services. An institution, not a relative, not persuadable at a barbecue. The occupancy agreement, in plain, bold English, Walter and Carol Lawson, exclusive lifetime right of occupancy, and the clause I'd paid extra to sharpen, which I read out loud, once, slowly. No lease, license, or short-term rental of any kind without the trustee's prior written consent. Then I set the velvet box on the table and opened it, and the brass key sat there catching the lake light, W&C, 40 years, 3 months early and half a day late. It was never sitting empty, Craig, I said. It was waiting to be given. This is Mom and Dad's house. It has been since March. Legally, it isn't mine. It isn't yours. It isn't the family's. And every agreement you signed on it is void. My mother made a sound between a sob and a laugh and put both hands over her mouth, exactly like my rehearsals, in the wrongest possible version of the scene. My father closed his eyes. And my sister? My sister looked at the deed and at the trustee's name and at the key, and her smile went out like a pilot light. For about 4 seconds, nobody breathed. Craig recovered first. Craig always recovers first. He picked up the deed and read it with his lips moving, the way my dad reads legal language, except on Craig it looked like a man checking a scratch-off ticket. Then he set it down and did the thing that told me exactly how deep the hole was. He kept pitching. Okay. This is actually fine. Better even. The trust can just approve it. We keep the listing live, Meridian signs off, I manage the property professionally, we split the income. Say the folks take 30%. The folks, I said, own the use of the whole house. You're offering them a commission on their own anniversary gift. I have bookings, Riley. His voice tightened one notch. Confirmed bookings. Deposits spent. There are cleaning contracts. There's a hot tub guy coming Thursday. You cancel a summer like that? The penalties? The reviews? I lose my host rating over this. I lose. There it was. The actual subject of every sentence he'd said all morning. And what? I asked. Were you going to lose telling strangers they could sleep in a house that was never yours? Vanessa came off the fireplace then, wet-eyed, furious the way people get furious when the story flips on them. You're doing it again. The paperwork thing. Making everyone feel stupid and small. Craig put in work. I put in work. You'd have known that if you didn't hide everything from us like we're thieves. The word hung there, doing its own inventory of the room. My mother whispered, Vanessa. And my sister said the quiet, true thing at last. He needed this one, Riley. You have no idea what it's been like. I gave him the key the same day you gave it to me. Not Craig went behind my back. I gave him the key. Loss number 2, notarized. My mother pulled me into the kitchen. My kitchen, her kitchen, the one with the continuous counter from sink to stove, so a man with tremors can slide a pot instead of carrying it. And she gripped my wrists with both hands, and here is the part of this story that still aches in a way Craig never managed. Riley, baby. I know, she said. I know you're right. I can read a room. I saw the deed. I know what he did is... She wouldn't even say a word for it, she just flinched. But it is my 40th anniversary. Your father's family is driving in from Ohio. 40 people tonight, in my backyard. I have waited my whole life to be celebrated one time, without somebody's crisis in the middle of it. Her eyes were wet and fierce and pleading all at once. So please, don't make a scene, Riley. Settle it after the party. Paper keeps. Parties don't. Don't make a scene, Riley. I want you to understand what that sentence is in my family. It's not a request. It's an operating system. It's 40 years of my mother buying peace on layaway and me co-signing every installment. Every swallowed comeback. Every fixed it quietly. Every welcome packet of my life signed in silence. She wasn't wrong to want her party. That's what made it awful. The person I built the fence for was asking me to leave the gate open one more night, and every instinct I owned said do it. Keep the peace. Handle it Monday through council like a professional. Through the kitchen doorway I could see my father in the living room, still on his feet, one thumb still moving slow on that oak rail. I kissed my mother's forehead. No scene, Mom, I promise you your party. I kept that promise too, technically. Because here's what I did not promise. I stepped out onto the porch, alone, past the lockbox bolted over my lever handle, and I made 2 phone calls in the June sun while inside Craig reinflated and started explaining to my parents how we can still salvage the summer season. Call 1, Dana Okafor. I described the morning in 4 sentences. Lawyers pay by the minute, and I respect money now more than ever. She was quiet exactly as long as it takes to write 1 line, then said, Unauthorized listing? No color of title? Trustee's obligation is immediate. We send the cease and desist today, and I loop in Meridian within the hour. Riley, do not negotiate with him. You're not a party. The trust is. Call 2, with Dana conferenced, Meridian fiduciary, who as trustee filed the report with the rental platform that afternoon, legal owner of record, listing unauthorized, all bookings void. I stood on that porch and I could hear Craig's voice through the screen, warm and reasonable, telling my shaking mother about shoulder season yield, and I felt the thing I imagine surgeons feel. Not anger. Precision. The check-in scheduled for 5 p.m. that evening never happened. A platform trust and safety team, it turns out, moves faster for deeds than for feelings. Every summer booking, all $19,400, canceled and refunded in full out of the host's payout account. An account whose balance, I would later learn, Craig had already spent forward against. I got back in my car to follow everyone south to the party, and I looked at the lockbox one more time before I left. It could stay one more night. Fences hold even with a ward on them. At 4:15 that afternoon, in my parents' backyard, under 40 feet of string lights he'd helped hang, Craig's phone began to buzz, and it did not stop. We were all at my parents' house in Wyoming by then, 5 of us moving around a backyard in the specific silence of a family that has agreed to detonate later. Folding tables, tablecloths, my mother directing chair placement with the focus of a field general because logistics were the only thing she could control. Craig, to his credit or his pathology, had shown up and hung string lights, 40 feet of them, whistling. A man who genuinely believed the morning had been a negotiation that ended in, "We'll circle back." At 4:15, his phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. Then again. Then, in a rhythm, like weather moving in. I watched him from across the yard as he read. The notification that the listing was removed. The email from Trust and Safety. 6 cancellation notices, one after another, each with its guest refund confirmation. And then the one that made his hand go to the fence post. The payout reversal. $19,400, clawed back in full from the Boyd Property Group account, which held, evidently, nowhere near $19,400, because deposits had already become cleaning contracts and a hot tub guy and, I'd guess, a routered cedar sign. Account balance. Negative. Account status. Suspended pending review. Craig looked up, and across 40 feet of lawn and unlit string lights he found me. I was setting out folding chairs. I set out another one. There are people who will call what I felt in that moment vengeance, and I've made peace with them being wrong. It wasn't vengeance. It was a contract enforcing itself, exactly as written, on the first person in my life who ever assumed my paperwork was decorative. Let me pause right here and ask you something. If you've ever been called selfish for protecting someone you love, a parent, a child, a gift you built with your own hands, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And stay with me, because the hardest part of this story isn't the paperwork. It's what I had to do at the party. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Craig found me by the garage 10 minutes later in the gap between the recycling bins and the rose trellis, which is where my family has always held its real meetings. Up close, the golf course polo had sweat at the collar and the salesman was gone. What was left was quieter and easier to pity. "You have to call them," he said. "The platform. Tell them it was a family misunderstanding. Tell them the owner authorized it retroactively. Meridian will do whatever you say. Don't tell me they won't." Riley. "I'm negative 19 grand as of an hour ago. I have contracts out. I have a guy coming Thursday for a hot tub I can't—" He stopped, pressed the heel of his hand to his eyebrow. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped its pitch deck register entirely. "It was supposed to belong to the family. That's all this ever was. An asset like that? Just sitting there. Do you know what that does to a guy like me? To sit at your parents' table for 10 years being the one whose stuff didn't work out, and then find out little Riley quietly has $500,000 of lake house and didn't even think to—" He caught himself. "Didn't even think to include me." The sentence he swallowed was the truest thing he said all day. On the drive down, I'd noticed the passenger seat of his truck through the window. A fan of envelopes, 2 of them edged in collection agency red. I hadn't planned to use that, and I didn't. And I won't pretend that was mercy. I just finally understood what I was looking at. Craig wasn't a wolf. He was a drowning man who'd mistaken my parents' anniversary for a shoreline. "The trust isn't angry, Craig," I said. It's just not persuadable. You've never met anything like that, have you? Vanessa's version arrived at 6, an hour before the guests. She came through the back gate with a casserole she'd been assigned in a previous, happier timeline, set it down hard enough to crack the lid, and delivered her position to the whole yard. I was doing what I always did, hiding behind documents, humiliating people who actually do things, turning a family blessing into a courtroom. You couldn't just be generous, Riley. You had to be right. She announced she wasn't sure she could stay tonight and watch me play landlord over Mom and Dad's anniversary, and my mother, who had been folding napkins into fans, went white. Vanessa, please. And then my mother turned to me. Riley, honey, can't you soften it? Just for tonight? Tell Craig you'll work something out this week. It doesn't have to be true. Just Carol. My father's voice, from the porch steps, cutting clean through the yard. He hadn't spoken since the driveway that morning. Everyone stopped. He sat there with his forearms on his knees, hands quiet for once, and he looked at my mother for a long moment with 40 years in it, and he said, "Let the girl alone. She's the only one here who did the math." Then he stood, gripping the rail, his own house's rail, the wrong height, the one I hadn't gotten to fix yet, and went inside. It should have felt like rescue. It half did. But Vanessa stayed, unfolding her chair like a declaration of war, and my mother wiped her eyes and smiled at the fence line, and I understood the actual price list of the evening. I could keep the cottage safe or keep this yard whole, and there was no clause anywhere in any of my beautiful paper that could buy both. I found my father in the garage before the guests came, sitting on his old shop stool at the workbench, tightening the hinge screws on my mother's recipe box, because his hands behave better when they're working. I sat on the sawhorse like I'm 9. For a while he said nothing, which from Walt Lawson is not an absence of conversation, it's the venue for it. Then, without looking up, "You did the trust in March," you said. "Yes, sir." Before he ever touched it. "Yes." He nodded slowly, set down the little screwdriver, and asked the question that took the skin off me. "Did you build that fence for your mother and me, Riley? Or did you build it so you'd never have to stand in a room and tell your sister no?" The garage got very quiet. Outside, I could hear the caterer's van and my mother's hostess laugh, one octave too high. Because here's what my dad had seen that I hadn't. Every document in that briefcase was true, and every document was also a way to have the argument without ever raising my voice. To let a trustee in an office in Grand Rapids say the no, I had never once said out loud, to Vanessa, at any table, in 34 years. Paper as armor. Paper as ventriloquism. "Both," I finally said, because he'd raised me not to lie in his garage. "It can be both." He looked at me then, and his eyes were kind and his jaw was set, and he said, "Tonight it can't." And he picked the recipe box back up, and that was the whole sermon. My father has never in his life used 10 words where 4 would carry the load. The party assembled itself the way family parties do, on rails, indifferent to the crater in the middle of it. 40 guests, Ohio cousins, church friends, 2 retired shop teachers who used to carpool with Dad, neighbors who'd watched Vanessa and me grow up in matching windbreakers, string lights on, lemon cake staged, on a bedsheet stretched along the fence, a slideshow of 40 years, the motel photo, the hospital hair, the minivan years, looping while my mother narrated to anyone in range, radiant, because whatever else was true, she was celebrated tonight, and I'd have paid any price for that part. I want that on the record before I tell you the rest. Vanessa worked the yard like a co-host, warm as July, not one glance wasted on me. My family can run a Cold War and a buffet line on the same evening. It's genuinely a skill. And Craig. Craig had undergone one of his resurrections. Shirt changed, hair wet-combed, phone face down in his pocket like a settled matter. He was moving through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at the right volume, topping up wine, and something about the performance had a shape I recognized, the specific busyness of a man building up to a microphone. I watched him lean in to my Uncle Pete, who was emceeing on the strength of owning a wireless speaker, and I watched him tap the speaker and mime a little toast gesture, just a few words after dinner, and Uncle Pete, who has never suspected anyone of anything, gave him a thumbs up. Every contract instinct I have started ringing at once. Whatever Craig had lost in the driveway and the payout account, there was one asset of mine he could still get his name on tonight. The story. Dinner cleared. The cicadas came up like an orchestra tuning, and my mother's face in the string lights looked the way I'd imagined it looking at the cottage door. I got the expression right, just at the wrong address. Uncle Pete dinged the wireless speaker into feedback, made a joke about his sound crew, and said the words, "Before cake, Craig wants to say a few." My mother reached for her wine. My father, beside her, went very still in a way I recognized from the driveway, the stillness of a man bracing on purpose. And I sat with my hands folded in my lap at the far table, and the old operating system booted up right on schedule, offering me its familiar menu. He's just going to smooth things over. Let him have his little toast. The documents are filed, the trust is safe, the platform case is closed, the war is already won. So what does the story cost you? Let it go. Keep the peace. Fix any loose ends Monday quietly, through counsel. It's a strong pitch. It has worked on me my entire life. Vanessa angled her chair toward her husband and put on the exact proud smile from the cottage fireplace, the one from before the briefcase, fully reloaded as if the morning had never happened. Craig stood, buttoned his jacket like a man accepting an award. He had actually changed into a jacket for this, lifted his glass toward my parents, and tapped the mic. 40 years, he began, warm as syrup. And tonight, Vanessa and I get to add something to it. And every head in that yard turned toward him, including my shaking mother's, and I felt my own glass go heavy as a verdict in my hand. I'll give Craig this. It was a beautiful toast. Smooth, warm, funny in the right spots, and engineered like a good contract. Every clause deniable. Walt, Carol, 40 years of showing the rest of us how it's done. And this family wanted to give something back that matched the occasion. So, glass raised, pause held, showman's beat. As of this summer, there is a lakeside retreat up at Maple Lake. For you, a family project. A lot of hands went into it, and I especially want to recognize my incredible wife Vanessa, who poured herself into getting that house ready. The yard broke into applause. Real applause. 40 people, church friends, Ohio cousins, somebody whistling. You see the architecture, right? Not one sentence was fully false. There is a retreat. Hands did go into it. Vanessa did carry groceries up there. On trips she used to photograph my closing documents. But who's auditing a toast? It was masterful. He'd lost the deed, the listing, and $19,000, so he was closing on the only asset left unguarded: authorship. By tomorrow, the version of the story living in 40 households would be Craig and Vanessa built the folks a lake house, and the trust, the oak rails, the 18 months, the $510,000 would belong to a lot of hands. My mother was clapping, confused, looking between Craig and me with her hostess smile pinned up like bunting. My father was not clapping. He was looking at me, not signaling, not pleading, just looking, steady, the way he looks down a board to see if it's true. And I sat there in the applause with my glass sweating in my hand and my whole life's operating system screaming its one command: don't make a scene, Riley. And I thought about a brass level and a thumb moving along an oak rail, reading it. I stood up. I want to tell you what I saw in the second and a half that I stood there with my chair scraping back and 40 faces rotating toward me, because it matters that I saw it before I spoke, and not after. I saw Craig with his glass still up, sweat at his temple in the string light glow, and for once I didn't see the polo or the pitch. I saw a man with red-edged envelopes fanned on his truck seat. A man 10 years into being the son-in-law whose ventures needed air quotes, who sat at Lawson tables watching a shop teacher get more respect for a deck he built in 2002 than Craig had gotten for anything, ever. A man raised, by somebody, by everything, to believe that a family is a portfolio and love is distributions, and that if he could just, once, stand at a microphone and be the provider, the debt under him would stop mattering. He hadn't stolen my parents' house the way a burglar steals. He'd grabbed it the way a drowning man grabs a dock post, and he'd have drowned my parents' savings right along with him, smiling, calling it swimming lessons. I understood him completely in that second and a half. I even ached for him a little, which surprised me. And none of it, this is the part I need you to hear, none of it changed a single thing about what needed saying, because understanding why the water rises is not a reason to hand it your father's house. Uncle Pete, bless him, saw me standing and assumed the program had a second speaker. He held out the microphone. And now, the other sister. The other sister. 20 years from now, put it on my headstone. I took the mic. I didn't raise my voice. That was the discovery of the whole night, actually. That the quiet voice I'd used my entire life for surrender works just as well for the other thing. I want to add to Craig's toast, I said, and Craig's smile did something complicated. Because he's right that there's a house, and he's right that it took a lot of hands. I hired most of them. Small laugh from the cousins, uncertain. I kept my eyes on my parents. Mom. Dad. 18 months ago, I started looking for a place on Maple Lake because of a photograph on your refrigerator that's been promising you the water since 1986. I found it in February. I spent everything I've ever saved on it, and I spent 4 months rebuilding it. The shower has no step, Dad. The floors don't slide. Every door is a lever. There's an oak rail from the porch all the way down to the dock, and I checked every foot of it with your level. My mother's hand had gone to her mouth. Somewhere behind me, a cousin said, "Oh my God," softly, like in church. It was supposed to be a surprise this morning, with champagne. Instead, you found strangers' cars in the driveway, because it spent the last 2.5 weeks earning $19,000 for somebody else, as a rental I never authorized. Not a sound in that yard now. Cicadas accepted. So, let me finish the toast properly. The house is yours. Legally, permanently, in a trust nobody can rent, borrow against, or manage on your behalf. It is not a family project. It is not an income stream. It is not available. I raised my glass an inch. Happy 40th. The key's real this time. And Craig, who could have survived the night by sitting down, chose the other door. Okay, hang on, this is what I mean, he said, loud, and the yard turned back to him like weather. He came up the aisle between the tables, gesturing with his glass, projecting for the cheap seats. This is the paperwork thing. This is what she does. We had a working arrangement that benefited everyone. The house pays for itself. Walt and Carol profit. And she torpedoed it out of spite this afternoon. Ask her. Ask her what she did to my business today. His voice was climbing registers, and I heard it the way you hear a pitch collapse in a conference room. The louder he got, the smaller he sounded, and every guest in that yard could hear the arithmetic now. Her savings, his listing. I said quietly into the mic. I reported an unauthorized rental to the platform. The platform agreed. That's the whole story, Craig. Vanessa was on her feet now, 2 spots of color high on her cheeks, and she fired the family's oldest ammunition across the tables at me, hissed through teeth, "Don't make a scene, Riley." 40 years of our operating system, deployed as a weapon, in front of the church friends, and I felt the sentence land and then, for the first time in my life, watched it miss. "This isn't a scene, Vanessa," I said. "It's a boundary. You've just never seen one at this table before." Craig slammed his glass down on the nearest table, wine jumping the rim, an Ohio aunt rescuing her purse, and played the last card in the deck, the one he'd said to my shaking mother's face that morning. Except now it came out with the costume off. That house belongs to the family. It belongs to Mom and Dad. I didn't even raise the mic for it. That was always the whole point. Silence, the long kind. Then Vanessa gathered her bag, took her husband's arm, and announced to the string lights that they would not stay to be humiliated, and 40 guests watched my sister walk out of our parents' 40th anniversary party through the side gate, past the bedsheet where the slideshow was, at that exact moment, showing the two of us at 7 and 10 in matching windbreakers, holding hands on a dock. The gate clapped shut, and the yard sat in the wreckage of it. My mother frozen halfway out of her chair, torn precisely in two, one daughter gone through the gate, one standing with a microphone, her celebrated evening face down in the grass. And then my father stood. He did it slowly, the way he does everything now, planting his cane, refusing 3 offered elbows on the way up, and he crossed to me and held out his hand for the mic, and his hand was trembling, and he did not put it in his pocket. He held the microphone in plain sight of everyone, shaking, and let it shake. 40 years ago, he said, I promised Carol a place on the water someday, teacher's salary, 2 girls. Someday kept moving. He looked at my mother the whole time. My youngest kept the promise for me, built it so I can walk to the dock by myself, checked it with my own level, I'm told. A breath, ragged. I don't have a speech. Carol, the water's ours. Raise 'em. 40 glasses went up in the string lights. My mother laughed and sobbed at the same time in a way I will be able to hear for the rest of my life, and that trembling toast, hidden from no one, was the answer to the question he'd asked me in the garage. You can't paper your way out of standing up. Not him. Not me. Not anymore. The accounting, since I know you want it. My parents moved into the cottage the second week of September, when the maples on that shore go the color of struck matches. The lockbox came off the door in about 90 seconds with Dad's cordless drill. He insisted on doing it himself, sitting in a lawn chair, taking his time. And the Boyd Lake House retreat sign spent October as kindling, which my mother called wasteful, and then watched burn with visible satisfaction. We redid the key ceremony properly. Champagne, lemon cake, the velvet box, the brass key. 3 months late and exactly right, except 4 chairs were set and only 3 filled. Vanessa didn't come. Vanessa hasn't come. She sends the kids' school pictures to my mother and speaks to me in a dialect of holiday card formality, and I've stopped waiting for the thaw. Some doors you leave unlocked without standing in them. Craig settled with the platform on a payment plan, sold the newer truck, and by spring had rebranded on social media as a family wealth mindset coach, which I am choosing to find funny because the alternative is not finding it funny. Nobody sued anybody. Family doesn't sue family. He was right about that one sentence. The trust just never blinked, because trusts don't. And here is my favorite line item, the one I didn't see coming. My parents' old 2-story didn't sell. On Dana's advice, the trust took it in and Meridian rents it out. Long-term, vetted tenants, market rate. Every dollar to my parents' care fund, every signature run through a trustee. A rental, done in daylight, with consent, the boring lawful way. My mother says Craig would appreciate the irony. My mother is wrong. Men like Craig never appreciate the irony. The irony is wasted on them. So I keep it for myself, the way I once kept everything. Last November, I stood at the kitchen window of that cottage and watched my father walk the full length of the dock path alone, cane in one hand, the other riding the oak rail I checked with his level. And I didn't move to help. Because a fence around the people you love isn't a lack of love. It's the last shape love takes, when someone starts measuring your family by what it can earn. A gray lockbox on a door I paid for. A brass key engraved with 40 years. My father's steady walk down that dock. That's my story. Now tell me yours. What boundary did you draw that someone called selfish? Put it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories, because next week's cut's even closer to home. Take care of yourself. That's family too.